Can you tell us what you think is retail today in India?
So, first of all, I don't come from a retail background, right? So, as a first disclosure, when I came to India and looking at what are the opportunities in India, sometimes you have to bring a outside perspective because you don't have all the reasons why something cannot work, right? So the same thing, you look at the traffic, you look at so many issues from access, affordability, and so on and so forth. And though retail is a large opportunity in India, uh, organized retail is still, as you know, a very small opportunity in terms of market share in India, right? So there are, I think India is a very, very unique country at multiple levels. Let's just take from organized retail, which requires a certain infrastructure and certain price point for it to work. It can only work in the large metros. Then you have the kirana, which is, of course, what is mostly retail. Then there is the story of the brands. In India, because a large amount of the consumption from the top 10% consume differently than the next 40%. Most of, if you see HUL and large players, much of their retail profitability comes from rural, not so much from urban. So then the question of brand and brand loyalty, right? India is actually doesn't have as much brand loyalty. If you see Parachute Oil, right? India is a distribution game, has been rather, less around a brand loyalty game. So Parachute Oil has 26x more depth in distribution than, let's say, the next local brand of oil. So, so I think distribution is a big part, and these things help certain kind of players. So the question in our mind when we sort of processed all this, and remember, I can only process it from what is the value of tech in solving a problem, right? Because you could come at it from a very different angle and come with also different and valid and viable answers. But since I'm not looking to run a retail, conglomerate, but I'm looking for where is the disruption from startups. So the way we looked at retail, and was to say, what can we do for the top 10% of India who think, act, behave globally? There is a certain brand association which is very different how they behave, more digital, premium value for experiences, and so on and so forth, versus the rest. So the e-commerce story, as all of us are very familiar here, is really the 100 million, you can call it 150 million, we can argue on some number in between, but really doesn't matter. The traditional e-commerce models, which is the way where we started, and fortunately at Kalaari we said this has to be first, because opportunities are like, peeling a onion. You have to create a certain infrastructure before you can unlock the next level opportunity. Today, with billion in transactions in UPI, I think we'll come to that, different kind of opportunities we can engage in. But if we look back, unlocking the digital opportunity of access was very, very important. And there are some things I hope we get to talk about on not every format can go digital, because customer acquisition cost in India is not cheap, but their ARPU is not high. So you have to find an answer that allows you to have a high CAC, and the only way you can afford the high CAC is if there is a repeatability. And if you can't get that repeatability, then these models, these digital models, can't easily work, right? Specific to India. So we'll talk about that hopefully in a bit. But coming back to summarize, so we saw a huge digital opportunity. Then who's the customer? What do they want? That is the first wave. Then there is a whole enablement of that, which is, important. That is, another opportunity. Now, thanks to Geo and UPI, we can talk about the next 40%, India, which is very different models. So brands, distribution, whether that is digital or physical, enablement of that, that's really how I see, from my lens, the retail opportunity. Yeah.
So, Vani, as you just enumerated, there are like probably a lot of different lines of talk that we can have here, a lot of different opportunities, and probably a lot of different challenges at different level. But the first opportunity, as you said, is the 10%, the e-commerce ready people who do not require teaching, they have access, they have everything. And then there's this 40% opportunity, which seems to be a very large opportunity, which seems to be attracting a different kind of challenges and different level of people. But what has been questioned in the last few months has been consumption. Like, is our consumption keeping up with it? And how that has made a difference to how these, both the 10% and the 40% behave. Has that made a difference also in the digital space? Like, are they behaving differently? Are companies working differently in retail because consumption is under pressure, for example? Do you see that?
You can look at consumption from a growing market or capturing market share, right? There is always let's assume for a moment consumption is not where it ought to be. It still doesn't take away the problems that exist in retail in India, right? Then the question of how are you going to capture market share is a very valid and viable opportunity even today, right? So I think that the overall retail opportunity, which is, has and will continue to reinvent itself, because wherever there is friction, there is a possibility of reinvention, right? So, and hence, I worry less about the consumption, which anyway I don't control. But I think India is growing enough in the context of what is material to us. Is there opportunity to, create new models, create companies of scale, and create successful businesses? Can we find those founders? Can we fund them? Since that's the context of NPC, to me, we are not solving for Amazon problem.
Correct.
Okay? We are solving from what is Amazon not doing that I can do, right? That is what we are solving for here. So, and I'm not worried about that. So from the context of the assumption, consumption.
Yeah, there are enough people, there's enough startups focusing on that, and there's enough places for them to work on, correct?
Absolutely.
Right. So now let's come to the point of the next 40%. Now there's a whole opportunity which probably you can touch on, is the creation of brands in that space, creation of distribution in that space, and creation of other enabling things like, for example, credit and payments and all that kind of thing. What do you think is happening in that space? Where do you think the opportunity is? You can touch on some examples of what you're seeing.
Yeah. So, by and large, the top 10%, let's just spend a minute on that. The distribution game for that is more or less done, unless you can figure out a new model through which you're going to somehow, redisrupt that equation, right? So, like we talked, CAC on an average is around 800 rupees, and an average order value is 300 rupees. So you go figure this out, right? 300, 400 rupees, which means that you have to be a massive distribution engine, right? In order to consistently succeed, and even there you're going to require enormous capital, with the Geo saying they're going to put 15 billion or whatever. So you have to figure out how you succeed on these distribution platforms, because they can't do it all. But as an investor, never say never. But we are done investing into the distribution platforms. So those were the days for Myntra, Snapdeal. You saw what happened with ShopClues if you don't sell your company soon enough. And there was a point where they had a relevant platform, right? So this distribution games is a massive scale game, and that has to be played differently. And I think that game is done.